everybody, and welcome to the second Laravel Worldwide Meetup. In case you haven't recognized me, it's Frick. And yeah, I just parked my car outside. I'm ready to go. We have a couple of interesting guests today on our stream. After the break, we'll have Michael Dyrynda talking about scheduled tasks in Laravel. But first up, we have Neo here, and let me bring it.
That handle tons of requests daily. Hopefully, some of the tips I share here will be useful to you or to your team. So a quick introduction. I'm Neil, a software engineer at About You, currently working with the Backbone team. I have been developing software for just around 15 years now, and been giving talks for a little over 4 years. I own Laravel Nigeria, which is arguably the biggest Laravel conference in Africa. I'm currently in a hotel in Amsterdam on vacation. So just in case it gets just a little bit noisy as the walls are quite thin, I apologize in advance. Also, if you're in or around Amsterdam and you'd like to grab a drink or you have some questions, but we can just talk a bit, you can shoot me a message on Twitter at Ighodaro. So moving on. Before we go deep, I would just like to say, as a heads up, while working on this talk, I quickly realized that no matter how much one tries, you cannot really fit all the optimization tips in the world into a 30-minute talk. So I will try to highlight some of the ones that I thought could be useful. But eventually, though, it will boil down to your specific usage and your application. And some of these tips may actually not even make sense for your own use case. Because optimization is such a team effort, it usually does not reside in one part of your application. So we will try to break it down into 3 parts. First to be the language. And in language, we will talk about some things that you can do on the language level that might help with your optimization. These are things that may not directly relate to the Laravel framework, but will also go a long way in helping the framework deal with heavy loads. Secondly, we will talk about infrastructure, and I'll say this is mostly DevOps related stuff. And there are many topics that could easily fall into this category. But like I said earlier, I will try and highlight a few and mention the others in passing so you can maybe read up on your own time. Finally, we'll talk about the frameworks, and this will just be things that you can do or have in mind to do while working with the framework. I will also casually try to highlight some of the things that some of the ways you can find bottlenecks in your application's code. So for language, simple one, keep your PHP version updated. This one seems easy, or at least it's relatively easy. And just by default, there are many improvements that can be added with newer versions, just updating to newer versions of PHP. And when you update to the latest versions, you often get some performance boosts, just absolutely free off the box. One of these boosts is to the amount of requests that your application can handle. For instance, in PHP 5, the number is lower than in PHP 7, and so on and so forth. But the thing is, with bigger infrastructures, it may be a bit difficult to just update, but trust me, it is usually worth it because in bigger infrastructures, you're very likely to see the noticeable performance hits, even though they may seem small. There are popular PHP process managers like PHP FPM, which are used widely, and usually when installed, they have sensible defaults. These defaults are set up in such a way where they would work with almost all compatible machines, regardless of their processing power. But because of this, it also means that the default configuration is usually not the best for you. But the starting point of the defaults are actually a very good starting point for your optimization. There are articles out there that can help you fine-tune your configuration specifically for your machine. For instance, in PHP FPM, there's the max children configuration, which determines the maximum amount of child processes that PHP is spawning. And I think the default of this is 10. But however, depending on your machine, it can actually be a lot more higher. Of course, there are formulas where you can use in calculating based on your RAM and other things in calculating this value for yourself. There are also configurations like max request and max spare servers that gives you more control on PHP processes and will have like a very direct effect on how much your application can handle. So tweaking these values will impact your application's ability to handle more requests. Another thing is infrastructure, specifically opcode caching. When a request to process and execute a PHP script is received, the code has to be scanned, parsed, after which the opcode will be created and processed, and then you have a response. And this process will happen for every script that is being requested of PHP. But with opcode caching, engines like Opcache, you can seriously cut down the unnecessary trips to the compiler to create, the opcode. With this Opcache active, whenever there's a request, it will go through the regular process the first time. But however, when the opcode is created, it will also be cached. This means that subsequent requests will not have to go through all the compiling effort to be able to create opcode because it will already be cached. So this is just a quick diagram that explains it all. And recently I was reading an article on Medium by Olaf, and he spun up a DigitalOcean server with just 1 gigabyte of RAM and ran a Laravel application with Opcache disabled, enabled, and then enabled but optimized. And for the first time, of course, he got 10 requests per second. And the second time he got 34, which almost tripled it, or actually tripled it. And on the third try, where he had optimized the default values of Opcache, he was able to get 4 times the request. So this already, you can see how much performance gain you get from just using Opcache. Of course, it's pretty cool to use Opcache, but like with everything, there's a gotcha. And just depending on your configuration, you might need to clear the cache after new code is deployed, because the way Opcache works is it will cache the entire thing. And if you don't clear the cache, then it will look like you didn't change anything in your PHP script, even if you did. This could be a bit tedious, and you could just use a Laravel package, which like Laravel Opcache, that will just give you maybe an artisan command that you can use during your deployment script. Another place on infrastructure you can get more is HTTP layer caching. Varnish, for instance, is like one of those HTTP layer caches. When a request comes to your application that has Varnish enabled, it will take the request and process it correctly the first time. However, it will also be cached. So it works a little bit like the way Opcache does. Well, all caches do. But when the new request is made, if there is a cache hit, then of course the trip to the web server is skipped altogether and the cache response is returned. This can significantly also reduce the amount of requests that your PHP processes need to handle. And because once you have so many processes or you have so many things to handle and there's like a cache, of course, the PHP processes will be free to handle other stuff. And also, as with Opcache, we may need to clear the Varnish cache also whenever a response is changed. Using another package, we can do this programmatically, or use the accompanying command, maybe just in case you want to schedule it or you want to add it to a deployment script. One of them is actually by Spot here, which is the Laravel Varnish. The link is on the slide. So there are quite a lot of things when it comes to infrastructure to speak about, but we have to just take a few and move on. But each of them could easily be a talk of its own. For instance, in database optimization, you can play around with the default configuration as usual, based on the available machine speed you have. And if needed, you could update the configuration. Like I said, with other configurations for the DevOpsy stuff, the default is usually there for like as a catch-all in case you install it on a fresh machine and they can't really tell automatically what your machine's power is. So fine-tuning these type of things will always give you a performance boost. For web servers like Nginx, the rule is also the same. Defaults are usually a casual setting. So you could also fine-tune a lot of things on the web server level. Other things like having high read-write storage and load balancing, the list goes on, but again, they could be talks on their own. So I've try to leave some links to some of the very good resources I've found online. Now to the framework part. First and foremost, caching the routes and the configurations. Of course, it goes without saying, but it should definitely be one of those things to add to your deploy pipeline, because again, on larger applications, especially if you have a lot of dependence on routes like an API or configuration values, then it makes so much sense to cache your routes and your configuration files. Definitely one of those things to add. Don't forget to clear cache also. It's again, like with other things with caching, if you don't clear cache, it'd be very difficult to see your changes. So of course you could add the artisan command line or the artisan command to your deployment script. Now the next one is understanding Eloquent. Now again, Eloquent could be another talk or a course. And actually, as a side note, Jonathan Ring actually has a nice Eloquent course called Eloquent Performance Patterns. I think you should absolutely check it out, because in here he talks about a lot of performance issues that could rise from using Eloquent and how you can fix them. It's basically a great course, so you should try it out. You should check it out. But back to Eloquent, I can give you some instances where I have seen some bottleneck creep in from. One of those is when accessing properties in loops. Of course, it is fast, but when you have, like, it's fast by default if you have little or maybe like 3 or 4 entries. But if you have a huge loop, this could be a problem. So like in the code, we can see a simple database fetch that would also load the database, the dealerships relationship, sorry. So now let's say there are like about 500,000 rows. Eloquent will actually create a new model for each of these entries. And if, of course, you're not using stuff like lazy collections, it could lead to out of memory issues. But let's assume you have that part covered up with using lazy collections, or you have optimized the memory some way. When we're looping through each model and we're accessing a property, for instance, Eloquent will make some checks. So it does actually quite a bit of checks just to see, okay, is it maybe is it a relationship? Does it have a mutator set? A lot of things. And then eventually return to you a value or a relationship. Now, these checks could actually take a lot of extra processing, and with a huge loop, it could actually become an overhead. So to save some seconds, like in the chart I showed above, it's basically a screenshot. You can see that in one process, the get, which eventually is set on the model, it's a magic method to get maybe an attribute that is set on the Eloquent relationship. This particular method is called 300,000 times, and we're just trying to access just a property. So because for one property it calls this get attribute, so depending on how many times it has to loop, it has to make this call. So to save some seconds for times like this or scenarios like this, it may be more beneficial to actually just use the query builder without Eloquent. Of course, like I said, it depends on your application itself. Another sneaky, well-known one, though, is the N+1 problem. And I will save some time just assuming like we've probably all heard of it at this point. But if we haven't, it would definitely be something to read up on. But the basic gist is, if you are accessing a model's property that points to a relationship, if that relationship is not eager loaded on the model, then simply accessing the property will fire a new SQL query. While this may not seem like a problem, having it inside a loop will eventually be. But like with other problems, it's a little bit difficult to spot, especially with, again, large systems, because you would have to wait for the entity to maybe grow into like hundreds or thousands before your database notices it or something. So it could be difficult to spot, but sometimes it really like could run your application into like performance issues. So watch out for those in your code base. They're always good choices, like the Laravel query detector, which I haven't tried myself, but it states that it also helps with detecting N+1 problems. There's also the debug bar, which has the queries tab. And in these queries, you can see the queries that are being run in your application in real time. You can also use the models tab where you see the amount of model objects that are created. So if, for instance, you're requesting 10 users and you try to also maybe get their countries, which is like a relationship, and you're expecting maybe 10 models and you find, oh, I'm getting 100 models. This could be a discrepancy and something you're not expecting that might be as a result of the N+1 issues. So like I said, there are sometimes it's hard to know when bottlenecks happen, but when they happen, you could also find bottlenecks using Blackfire. Blackfire is really a great tool. Before coming to About You, I previously didn't use Blackfire, but when I used it, it's actually a very good tool for looking through how code is being processed, how much time is being spent where, and also how many calls are being made. You basically get a lot of information. And with these information, you can easily pinpoint, okay, this, especially the ones that are offending will be in bright red. So you can easily say, okay, the 90%, or in this case, 17 or 18% of this single process is being spent with Eloquent just trying to get an attribute. And if I don't need this amount of work, I could simply just switch from using Eloquent to maybe like the query builder without Eloquent and save myself a good chunk of this 18% time that it takes to parse the script. There's also a tab to see SQL queries and memory consumption, and it is quite useful, especially when you're looking at an entire process, which is maybe the process is not very transparent, but you want to see what is happening in there. Just slapping Blackfire over it and looking through each process on how it goes about handling it could very, very well help you solve these problems. So one last tip before I call it a night is preheating and queues. So queues is something maybe Michael will speak or touch on his show. I'm not entirely sure. But how preheating works is something like this. So imagine you have a campaign to be run, and you know maybe you're running it on New Year's Eve, and maybe the traffic that is expected is going to be higher than usual. If you have a known set of variables, for instance, we know, okay, these are the products that are going to be presented in this campaign or that are needed for this campaign, we can kind of preheat them in the cache. So we take all the products with the help of a background job. We basically send each product to a queue and say, okay, these are the products that need to be preheated. And from that queue, we have a set of workers which just go to the queue and pick whichever is available and preheat that product or all the product data we need into a Redis cluster. This way, when we are trying to fetch them again, it's going to be a lot faster because everything we need for the campaign has already been pre-cached and been preheated maybe the night before or something. Another one thing to notice, it's also quite possible to return responses before continuing with other processes, and that could take time. Of course, we can use queues, but there are certain instances that queues might not work. So for instance, I can give you the example of we had an endpoint and we needed to cache the response of that endpoint and then return. In some certain situations, the process that is going to write to disk is maybe full, or maybe something happens and it's just not responding quicker. The problem with this is the entire endpoint, even though it has done what it needed to do, will only get blocked because of this writing thing to the cache. So in these cases, it can be very, very useful to actually just return the response from Laravel. And then when you're done, you can cache the response. I think you can do this with a terminable middleware, if I'm not wrong. So these are some of the things we have done to improve some parts of our code. And like I said earlier, it was I realized that it was a lot of stuff to talk about and a lot of things to cover. So I tried to cover the ones that seemed the most easy and at least that can fit into our talk. So thank you very much. Unfortunately, I may need to handle some things. So I might not be able to stay for extensive questioning. But of course, I'm always available on Twitter, and you can send all the questions. Or again, like I said, if you're in Amsterdam, you can say hi, and we could also meet. But thank you.
Thank you, Neo. I don't know if you can hear me. Maybe now you can.
Yeah, I hear
Ah,
you now.
fantastic. Okay,
Yeah.
I solved it meanwhile. Thank you so much for your talk, man. I know that working against performance issues, it can be a little bit scary, but yeah, having some good information and tips like this can certainly help. So thanks again for giving the talk, man. I instructed people to if they have questions, to just put them in the chat. So take a look there for some questions.
That is great. I'll be looking forward to any questions you have.
Cool. Thanks, man. And
thank you again for the opportunity. And yeah, we'll talk after Laravel.
Yeah. Bye, man. Okay, now we'll have a 5-minute break, and after that we have Michael Dyrynda's talk. See you in a bit. Yes, and here we are back for the second part of the meetup. Now, before we head into the talk of Michael, I have a special guest coming on who's going to give a little introduction about a project that she started. I'd like to welcome to the chat, I'm going to put on the camera, Zuzana Kunckova. Take it away. Hi, Zuzana.
Hi, everyone. Well, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the space to talk about Laravels. So I came on today just to talk about Laravels, a community I'm building, a community for women developers in Laravel. So it's all started. I'd like to give a little bit of the backstory so people know where it even came from. So I came up with the idea of Laravels about a year and a half ago in December 2018. Back then, I was a kind of a new Laravel developer, and I was looking for a community that I could be a part of. I was already a member of a few women-focused communities back then. There was Front-End Foxes, which is a community around the front-end web technologies, and Mums Can Code, which was a community for mothers who changed their career, let's say, in life and became web developers. So I already could see the benefits of these communities, because communities like that, they support, promote, encourage other women developers, and they give them the platform to speak in what is mainly male-dominated industry, such as tech. So I could already see the benefits, and when I started working with Laravel, I was looking for something like this, but I couldn't find any. I mean, don't get me wrong, the general Laravel community is amazing. I mean, this is one of the best selling points of Laravel, I believe, because the people are just so kind and welcoming and friendly. I have nothing bad to say about that at all. But I was just missing this, I don't know, this sisterhood feeling that I experienced as being part of a bigger group of women. So yeah, because I couldn't find any, I decided to create one myself. It only took a year and a half of deliberating whether I can actually do it, but that's besides the point. So here we are. So right now, Laravel is really in the pre-launch stage. When I put out the tweet about a month ago, it was really to find out whether people are actually interested in this idea, whether they would think it was beneficial. And the response I got was, I mean, huge, both positive and negative. But to be honest, I welcome all opinions, because these opinions, they inform my decision-making when it comes to what I want Laravel to do in the future. So I genuinely appreciate all the opinions, all the replies I got on that tweet. And yeah, some people questioned the need for a women-focused community, and some people wondered whether I wasn't actually damaging the general Laravel community by separating women. But I like to think that I'm not separating women. What I'm trying to do is unite the community, because as long as there are people in a community that feel like maybe they don't belong, or they are not heard, or they don't have the same opportunities like other developers, the community is not healthy. And this is nothing to do with Laravel in particular. This is a thing in tech in general, which is a male-dominated industry. And the research, supports this, that there is much less women, and women may feel it might be harder to get into tech and stay in tech as well, given the demands of the job. So this is what I would like Laravel to do, really, to give a platform for women to, have resources for them and place for women that can come together and encourage each other. So this is what I would like Laravel to be in the future. I've also decided to build Laravel in public. What I mean by that is that I'm documenting the process on my personal website, zuzana-k.com. And the reason for that is when I started building Laravel, I couldn't find, there's no guide online anywhere that would tell you how to build a community. Like, do this, don't do that, beware of this. I couldn't find anything like that. So I'm sure I'm going to do or make many mistakes and do a lot of things I should have done differently. But that's why I decided to document the whole process, because I think not only it might be beneficial for somebody else in the future, but also for myself. If I come back in a few years' time, I will see the beginnings. I will see how far we've come, and there will be a record of the whole journey. So that's why I decided to document the ups and the downs and everything that goes with it. So that's that. Also, I'd like to make a disclaimer. I am well aware, but every time I talk about Laravel, I keep talking about women. But what I want to make sure that everyone understands is that what I mean is not just women, but anyone who identifies as women, as well as binary and trans folk. And I know I have to work on my language. I'm well aware. So I just like to thank you for your patience while I'm getting it all sorted out. So yes, I think that's all I wanted to say. If you'd like to keep up with Laravel, please sign up to our newsletter, or you can follow us on Twitter at LaravelsPHP. And yeah, I think that's all. Thank you, Freak.
Yeah, thanks, Zuzana. I think it's great that you're doing this initiative. And yeah, I hope you'll have fun building this out, because I think it's an important subject, which really deserves a talk on its own. And yeah, thank you for what you're doing for the community.
Thank you.
Bye, Zuzana. See you later.
See you, everyone. Bye.
So that was Zuzana. Now it's time for a talk by Michael, but I have a little secret with you to share. You might have guessed it already. Michael is fast asleep in Australia. He's like in a different time zone and he's sleeping. He has to take care of his family, but he pre-recorded his talk. So I can share that talk with you, and that's what we are going to do right now. So let me share my screen, local screen sharing. Here is Michael's video, and let's just start, and I hope you'll hear the QuickTime audio. Here goes.
Hey, thanks for having me. Sorry I couldn't be here live. It's 4 a.m. right now where I am, and pregnant wife and sleeping child. If I wake the sleeping child, I get in trouble with the pregnant wife. So this one's pre-recorded. So thank you for having me. Today we're going to be talking about staying punctual with scheduled tasks. As Frank mentioned in the introduction, I'm Michael Dyrynda. You can find me at Michael Dyrynda on Twitter. I'm the co-host of the Laravel News podcast. I'm the co-host of the North Meets South Web podcast, and I'm the single host of the Road to Laracon podcast, which is a mostly regular podcast around interviewing speakers for the Laracon US conference about their taste in music. It was actually an idea of Freek's for that one as well, so thanks for Freek for leaving one for me. But today we're talking about staying punctual with scheduled tasks. If you can stitch together a cron expression by hand without thinking twice, this may be a bit of a refresher for you, but we're going to run through the basics. If you are lucky, at the top of your cron tab, you're going to see something that looks like this, and it essentially outlines what it is that your cron expression needs to look like. going from left to right, the 5 stars, minute, representing the minute of the hour, then followed by the hour, which is obviously the hour of the day, then the day of the month of the year, and the day of the week. If you're using the day of the week, some systems will consider 7 as Sunday, but it's general rule that you go 0 through 6, Sunday through Saturday. In some systems, they also support the 6th star, or the 6th positional parameter, which is at the year. And then, of course, you've got the command to execute. Typically, sometimes you'll see in there a username as well. Now, we're all familiar with cron expressions, right? I'm going to run through some very quickly that are going to basically tell you, I'm going to show you the expression, and I'm going to show you the expression, and then I'm going to translate it for you. So the 5 stars means every minute. The */5 means every 5 minutes. This one means on the 1st of the month at 4 p.m. This one is twice an hour at 0 and 30 minutes past the hour. This one is every Thursday at 6 a.m. And this one is 2 days a month on the 1st and the 14th at 3 p.m. Now, by means of example, let's say you need to run a TPS report every day at 9 a.m. Now, you start your day, you're asleep, your alarm goes off, you go and make yourself some coffee, you jump on your computer, you run your report, and there's your automation. But what happens when that alarm doesn't go off? Someone's going to look like this, and depending on how many times it happens, eventually going to look like this. So that is where cron comes in. Now, assuming you have access to the server and permission to edit the files, managing cron entries is done typically in one of these 3 places. The etc/cron tab is a system-wide global file which handles cron tabs for all users on the system. If an application or a service doesn't run as a specific user, you will have an application or service specific cron tab entry. And for general users of the system, if you were to log in and run cron tab-e, you bring up your user specific cron tab, and these typically end up in varspal cron tabs and then the username. But you can't do this with VS Code or PHP Storm, not even Sublime Text. I'm not really sorry about that. So running the TPS report every day at 9 a.m. So we go back to this. There is a link in the previous slide. I'll have it in the show notes I'll have it in the presentation notes as well for where you can get this if you don't have this in your cron. And essentially what we want to do is we want to copy that first line and remove the leading hash, the pound symbol. It's a comment. And then we're going to construct this 9 a.m. cron schedule. So the first positional argument is the minute of the hour. So we're running this at 9 a.m. We could run it at 9:03 or 9:08, but we're going to do it 9 a.m. on the dot. Every hour, okay, the second one is the hour. So we're going to go 9 a.m. Then we're going to throw in the command there, user bin env php, TPS report. We're going to write the file and get out of Vim. So the cron tab, again, as I said, it looks like this. The link will be in the speaker notes, whatever the thing is called. And then if you're ever wanting to have a quick and easy way of going through this, crontab.guru, you can hit that up. You can put in your cron expression, and it'll show you what that expression evaluates to and when you can expect that command to run. So if we were to say 9 a.m. when I put this together on the 15th of July, 9 a.m. was basically, it'll run next on the 16th, and then it'll run every day, 17, 18, 19, 20, and so on and so forth. And so we end up with a cron expression that looks like this: 09, 3 stars, user bin env PHP, tps-report.php. So you can have a little bit of a sleep in at 9 a.m. now. But there are some pitfalls to using the cron tab and using cron in general for managing your scheduled tasks. First and foremost, for us as developers, there is no version control, at least not alongside the application code. There are possibly ways of doing this within the operating system that you can track these changes, but typically speaking, there's no version control. Depending on your work environment, you might not even have access to the server to modify the cron tab. You won't have access to the system, or you won't have access to the files. Typically, developers that don't have access to the cron tab won't have access to logs. And usually when a cron entry is set up, it looks something a little bit like this. There'll be an arrow, dev null, 2, arrow, &1. And what this essentially means is to redirect all of your output, whether that's an error from the standard error or standard output. So just log entries from, or log output from your application, gets sent into effectively a black hole. You could put a mail to entry. So before each cron expression, you can put mail to equals and then an email address. But let's face it, no one is going to read that output. May as well just throw it in the bin. It is easy to make mistakes. Remember our 9 a.m. run? It looks like this, right? No. It's minute, then hour. This is 9 a.m. It's difficult to manage all these individual entries. Let's say that we're Laravel, right? And we want to schedule a major release in February and September. So Laravel 7 came out in February. Laravel 8 is going to come out in September. At the time that I put this presentation together, we just assumed it was the 1st of September at 10 a.m. So on the 1st of February and September at 10 a.m., we publish a major release. Every Tuesday at 10 a.m. is our regular release cycle, whether that's a minor release or a patch release. And then typically every Tuesday, about 15 minutes and then 45 minutes later, we have a patch release because something broke. We're human, things happen. And then one time only, on the 27th of February, 2020 at 4:20 p.m. on systems that support the year, right? We're going to Livewire Blaze. We're going to release Livewire to the world and we're going to have a great time with that. Check it out. It's amazing. Now, the cron expressions are not necessarily easy to follow. So you can put some comments in your cron tab, but it's nasty to look at. It's busy. It doesn't really help. And if you don't have access to it, you're not going to see this anyway. It is limited to command line tools. Okay. So you can't schedule a job from your application, for example. If you're using Laravel Forge, you have the ability to use this interface to schedule commands, whether it's every minute, every hour, every night, weekly, monthly, whenever the server reboots, you might want to perform some action. And you've got the option to do custom, which gets us back to the 5 stars. It used to cause issues if you had an invalid cron entry in here. You would have none of you, as I said before, you'd have none of your cron tasks run. So using the custom schedule, this will actually validate for you. So you don't have to worry about invalid ones, but you still need to understand what that is and how it works. So now we come to Laravel's task scheduler. It is just PHP, okay? You already know Laravel, you already know PHP. There's nothing really new here. It's intuitive because it's part of your Laravel application. It is, as you would expect, easy to pick up. So before we had the 5 stars, well, now we just say every minute. Before where we had */5 and then 4 stars, now we just say every 5 minutes. Instead of this or this, we can say daily, which will run at midnight, or daily at a 24-hour time, at 1 p.m. in this instance. And instead of this or this or this, we've got monthly, which is the first of the month at midnight. We've got quarterly, which is the first of the quarter at midnight. And we've got yearly, which is the first of the year at midnight. Happy New Year. We have a single point of reference. The cron tab, it could be in cron tab, it could be in a user-specific entry, it could be in an application or server-specific cron tab. In a Laravel application with the task scheduler, you have a single point of reference. It is the app console kernel.php file, and it looks a little bit like this. So before we had the 09 *** user bin env php, we just have this. We have schedule command tps report daily at 0900 9 a.m. It's versioned with your application. You can go in, you commit your entries, you can see in there who added an entry. Hopefully they've got a better explanation or a better commit message there. It could just say whip, who knows? But you'll see who did it and what they added. And that means that anybody can submit a pull request, and it means that you can follow your normal code review process. And you only need one cron entry in one place, and there's an asterisk there, and we'll come back to it. But your cron entry looks like this: ******, which means every minute, cd into your application directory and run PHP artisan schedule run, and then send the output into dev null, into that black hole, which is fine in this instance because failures will send out a flare, or they'll ping Sentry, Bugsnag, Rollbar, or Honeybadger, whatever you're using for error tracking. Okay, Laravel is going to handle all this for you, so you don't have to worry about any of that output disappearing. And you can log stuff from your scheduled tasks as well directly with your Laravel application. You don't need to worry about invalid expressions because everything's intuitive. Everything's got named methods. You've got every minute, every 5 minutes. You've got every hour, things like that. So you don't have to worry about invalid expressions unless you're using the cron method specifically, and you need to come up with something that's not handled by Laravel. So broadly speaking, that's a good idea. But as with anything, there are considerations. Remember the asterisk. Don't forget the one cron entry that you do need. If you don't have this in your cron tab, none of your application scheduled tasks will run. You'll probably figure it out pretty quickly. Tasks can be filtered, which means that they should run on a given schedule unless some condition evaluates true. Take a look at this entry, for example. We want to welcome our users every day at 10 a.m. when we have new users to notify. If that user new exists query returns false, the scheduled command will be skipped until the next time it's due to run. So today at 10 a.m., if there are no new users, we'll do nothing. We'll move on to the next task. And then tomorrow at 10 a.m., we'll try again. Or we've got this one, we've got the skip one. So we want to ring an alarm every day at 8 a.m. unless you have a toddler. If you are making it to 8 a.m., you are very lucky because most days I don't. So tasks can be filtered, and it's not immediately obvious when a task has been filtered compared to an error that prevented the task from running at all. So when you have an error, you'll get something in Sentry or Flare or Bugsnag or whatever. If you get the condition wrong, you might have a task that just never runs, and you're not aware of that. And tasks can overlap in at least two different ways. So we're going to look at two different ways that they can overlap. The first one is slow tasks. So let's say that every 5 minutes we want to notify our application users of new followers, which is fine. Most people aren't going to have a huge influx of users unless you're this fella from Canada and you start putting out tweets that have got this little fire emoji on them. And suddenly you go from 436 followers to 20,300 followers. And so what's happening? We're running this every 5 minutes. Now, I'm not a designer, so this is a really bad graphic, but essentially at 0 minutes, we start notifying our users of new tasks, and that takes 3 minutes to run, give or take, and then it stops. And then at 5 minutes past the hour, we've got a big influx of users to notify. So we're going to churn through, depending on how you've written it. If you've deferred everything to a queue, it's probably not going to be a problem. But if this is all new to you, you could run across these things. So 5 minutes, the task takes 6 minutes to run. And at 10 minutes past, your task starts running again and again. Depending on how you've built this out, you might run into issues where we're 80% of the way through notifying our application users of their new followers, and suddenly they start getting duplicate emails, okay? So the best way and the easiest way to take care of this is to just tack on the without overlapping method onto that chain. And essentially what will happen is at 10 minutes past, right, where we're still running, Laravel will notice that the task is still running. It creates a mutex to uniquely identify the task, and it'll go, I'm still running, we'll skip it. So it'll take 6 minutes to run, we'll skip the intermediary one, and then at 15 minutes past the hour, we'll go back to normal. This can also happen with cron, but it's much easier to identify in the task scheduler. Inflection points. What are we talking about inflection points here? Let's say we've got this command that every 15 minutes will fetch new calls, okay? And now we've got our TPS report that runs daily at 9 a.m. We have our user churn report that runs every week at 9 a.m. And for good measure, every hour, we have a command that prints money. This means that once an hour, our fetch new calls task and our print money task will overlap. Once a day, our fetch new calls, TPS report, and print money commands will all overlap. And once a week, all 4 of these tasks will overlap. And that's because Laravel will essentially loop through any tasks that are due to run, right? So if the scheduler has some due events to run and the filters pass, so we don't have any skipped tasks and we need to run them on one server, we'll dispatch either a single server event or we'll just run the event directly. And what this means is that on Monday at 9 a.m., you have 4 tasks that run one after the other. Right. So inflection points, what do we mean? What do I mean when I say inflection points? This command here, fetch new calls every 15 minutes. The command will fetch all the calls for the current day from our phone provider's API and process them one after the other. Fetch the calls, each of them, call, process, call, right? At 9 a.m., we have 20 calls to process. By 10 a.m., we've taken 50 calls in our contact center. By 1 p.m., it's 150 calls. At 7 p.m., it's 300 calls, and it's a bit quiet at that point. So by 9 o'clock at night, there are 330 calls to process. Now at 9 a.m., with 20 calls, this takes 2.18 seconds to run. At 10 a.m. with 50 calls, it takes 2.63 seconds to run. At 1 p.m. with 150 calls, it takes 21.7 seconds to run. At 7 p.m. with 300 calls, it's 110.8 seconds. And at 9 p.m. with 330 calls, it's 138.8 seconds. So, back to the inflection points. What does that mean? It means that at 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. and 1 p.m., the scheduler, you wouldn't notice anything wrong, right? Fetch new calls will run in 2 seconds, and then print money will run. At 10 a.m., fetch new calls will run in 2.63 seconds, and then print money will run. At 1 p.m., you still haven't noticed anything, but this task is now taking 21.7 seconds to run, and then print money runs, all within that minute, right? But at 7 p.m., we're taking 110 seconds to run, okay? So a minute and 40 to run. Now, print money, which is supposed to run at 0 minutes past the hour, is now running at 1 minute and 40 seconds past the hour. And then at 9 p.m., we're 2 minutes and 18 seconds. Now, it probably doesn't mean a lot with just the two tasks, but as you start to build things up, right? 9:02, 10:03, 1:22, 7:01:40, and 9:02:18, right? This thing can start as you scale up and you add more tasks and more things will overlap. And it's totally normal. It's going to happen. There's going to be these inflection points, right? But Laravel is about solutions, and the easiest solution to this problem is to run in the background. Just tack run in background onto each of these tasks. And what Laravel will do is will check, do I need to run this in the background? And it'll run in the background. But make sure that you are logging. When you send tasks to the background, you lose some visibility. So make sure that you're still logging the output somewhere. If you have multiple servers running your scheduler, which is completely normal, it is enough in many cases to just tell Laravel to run on one of them. And that's just a matter of tacking on one server onto the end of your command. Exceptions used to cause cascading failure. Before Laravel version 7.7, it used to just bail. You'd get an error in task number 2, right? So if your TPS report failed, if it threw an exception, right, your money won't get printed. It's as simple as that. There's a simple solution to that. It is upgrade Laravel. Use Laravel Shift if you have to. It's easy. Keep on top of it. No LTS. So here's the next thing. How do we identify these things that we need to consider? If you have a missing scheduler cron entry, you'll probably look a lot like this when you realize you have yourself a deployment checklist. You only need to do this once per application deployment. Have a checklist. Missing TPS report. Eventually, someone's going to come at you looking at it like this, and you probably want to find out some other way that this is happening. What about overlapping tasks and inflection points? I didn't know. This is where monitoring comes in, right? Monitoring is not error tracking. Error tracking tells you when something went wrong. Error tracking tells you if the generate report method threw an exception. But error tracking doesn't tell you when a task didn't run. It doesn't tell you when a task was skipped. It doesn't tell you when a task overlapped. And it doesn't tell you when an inflection point was reached. There are a number of monitoring options for us in the Laravel community. First and most recently, we have the Sparsy Laravel Schedule Monitor, which is a good option if you're happy with logging into your server to check status, and it integrates with Odia if you're using that as well. And it means that you can log in, you can see all the output in there. If you don't have access to the server, it could be problematic. There's a Chronotor. It's been around for a long time. It integrates with Slack, Teams, PagerDuty, and so on. It's generic monitoring. It's a good option if you want to combine with other crons or have non-Laravel applications to manage, but it does require that you manually configure each task, right? You need to go and set it up in Chronometer. You need to go and set it up in your app. It's tedious, right? Might not be a problem if you've only got a few things. If you're using Envoy for deployment, you can use heartbeats. It does, again, require manual configuration for each task, but if you're already in that ecosystem, it's good to go. And next, and the last thing that I'll talk about is Then Ping Me, which is a new selection from me and Jake Bennett. Then Ping Me is specifically tailored for Laravel. You install it once per project, right? You log in, you create a new project, you get 2 commands to run. Composer require Then Ping Me Laravel, and PHP Artisan Then Ping Me Setup, and a unique ID. This won't work for you. This is my unique ID. There you go. Composer require the package, run the setup command. We generate a signing key, we write the configuration, we publish a config, and we send all of your tasks through to Then Ping Me. And it automatically updates. You can stay punctual with your scheduled tasks. And once you set up, we will detect automatically your commands. So in a default Laravel application, you've got a inspire command that runs once an hour. It will update automatically at deploy time if you integrate it with your deploy process. So if you're using Envoy or if you're using a script in Forge for deployment, just run PHP Artisan Then Ping Me Sync as part of that process. And it will automatically pick up that TPS report that you've added at 9 a.m. It will help you identify any tasks that are going to overlap, any tasks that will run in maintenance mode, any tasks that are configured to run on one server or in the background, or if they have a truth constraint, which means it will help you identify skipped execution. Now, we said before, skipped execution is distinct from a failed execution in that it was meant to skip, right? There was some condition that evaluated to true, which means that it shouldn't run. And in this case, you'll see the task did go when it was supposed to go on the every minute schedule, but it didn't need to, or every hour schedule, sorry, and it didn't need to run. It also helps you to find inflection points. So this is a real scenario that happened to me in my day job where a task of mine was taking longer and longer and longer. And when we first started monitoring with Then Ping Me, we would get errors late into the day of tasks that were overlapping each other. And it wasn't until we checked that we could see, oh yeah, this is taking 3 minutes to run, which means the task that was meant to run on the same schedule, on the hour, didn't run. So we fixed that. We put in the we put in the on one server. And we've got the ability to configure our settings for alert conditions. So if you have a task that runs every minute or every 5 minutes, it may not be critical that it reports every time without fail. It could be that you could skip one and no worries. We also have consecutive failure. So we have the consecutive failure thresholds there. We also have allowed runtimes, reports that run once a week or once a day. Your TPS report or your subscriber report or your churn reports, things like that. They might take 20 minutes to run. You send them to the background and you don't have to worry about it. This is the easiest way to get the detail you need to know when your jobs need additional help to run reliably. So we are launching that today, the 25th of August. You can sign up at thenping.me. And hopefully you can learn a thing or two about your applications just as Jake and I did. We built this for ourselves and we figured we'd bring it out to the masses. So hopefully I've been able to point out some things that are potentially going to affect you in your scheduled tasks in your Laravel applications. Unfortunately, I'm not here to take questions, but hit me up on Twitter at Dyrynda, and we can discuss further. So thanks for having me.